It's good to be back. Thank you guys for the text. So I was here a couple weeks ago to lead worship, and I'll be honest, I feel a lot more comfortable with the guitar in front of me. Yeah. But there's been a desire in me since, well, I shouldn't say desire in me. The Lord has put something in me that I feel like, it's like, what's the greatest thing you fear? And you can go through all life avoiding that, or you can actually believe that God, has something great for you if you work through the fear and what's holding you back. And like this part for me, I've been just privileged of being a part of just different churches and church in general for so many years. But this part of me has always been like a mental block when like my mind gets in the way when it comes to this part, which is one reason I love music so much, is because music seems to unlock it, and just whatever God has put into music and the tension of notes and everything has really just speaks to our soul and our spirit and unlocks it, and I find great peace in that. That being said, I try to take opportunities. So when you guys asked to come, I was like, absolutely, I'm gonna come. We're gonna dive into something together. And one of the things about doing this is vulnerability. You're just like putting your heart out there, and it's there's pastors who step out of ministry hundreds and hundreds and hundreds every year, just because they just bleed out so much. It's just a vulnerable position to be in, and anybody in leadership really knows that it's a vulnerable position to be in. But tonight, I actually want to walk us through something of flourishing, specifically around authority and vulnerability. I think a lot of times, in terms of paradigms or like contrasting words or principle, like kingdom principles, like when Jesus says, "What is loose in heaven will be loose on earth. What you give us the keys. What you bind in heaven will be," like, what does that mean practically? I think in terms of like principles and stuff like that. And so I like graphs, I like charts, I like definitions. I like to define things or redefine things if necessary. And so tonight, we'll just stick with me. We're going to work through something, okay? Because flourishing, I believe, is something that God has designed us all to do. Not in the definition of maybe the world's view of it, which is less about, the world's view is a little more on wealth and success, okay, to flourish that way, where I believe Christ is calling us more to something that involves vulnerability, but yet also the authority of what He's given His church. And so we're going to walk through a little bit of that tonight. And alright, here we go. Image bearers. So people of God, we do know that we bear the image of God, that He has made man in His image. Okay, we know this in the beginning in Genesis 1:1, and He says that. So we as followers of Christ really have the thumbprint of God in our DNA, that there is a part of Him in each one of us. It takes all of us to bear His image. You can't just do it by yourself. That's why getting together in corporate settings in church is just a vital part of it. That's why He says a husband and wife, they shall be one. Okay, they bear the image of God together. His church together bears His image. It says that He has scattered gifts among His people. Okay, so each one of us has something specific that He has given us that needs to be part of the greater body to display and reveal who He is. When I believe that when God said that greater things you will do, when Jesus has to leave and just says that greater things we will be able to accomplish, is not necessarily individually speaking, but it's because when the Holy Spirit came to get into the church, there's now a multiplication process, and there's a greater power available to do things that just not one person could do. And I know Jesus was God, but since He was also man, and there's something about all of us together that has a great image of God. Worshiping Him together like we just were, or like those moments of taking communion that we just were, speak of that. So image bearers, authority. Let's first define authority, because it's not all about control. Authority is defined as the capacity for meaningful action, okay? So any authority in your life, okay, isn't just about getting something done, but the capacity of meaningful action, okay, that you can get something accomplished. Authority in my child's life. I have the ability to encourage my kids, to encourage my children, to take meaningful action to something. Okay, so authority in their life. So it's just the capacity for meaningful action. And vulnerability be the other one. This is the tough one right here. Vulnerability. This is the one where your heart is just out. This one's defined as the exposure to meaningful risk. Exposure to meaningful risk. And all this is going to circle back to Jesus and what we see with Jesus' authority and also his exposure to risk, ultimately his road leading to the cross. Vulnerability. A few years ago, I think my whole life I've kind of suppressed a lot of what might be defined as like emotion because it was just a form of weakness. And you know, the culture's put that on me and I just put it on myself. But the thing about vulnerability is you're allowing yourself the potential to be just deeply wounded and hurt. And it's a painful, painful process that takes a lot of time sometimes when those hurts come. Especially when you're walking outside of like who God made you to be. You know, God called us to freedom and to live in freedom. And if I asked probably somebody who's like 15 what freedom would look like in their life, they'd probably be like, well, I can't wait to get my license and start driving and get away, get my own job or move out. And that freedom in God's eyes is just living according to his design for you. Freedom is just living according to design. Okay, a train, if you put it in a field, you can say be free. That train is designed for the tracks, and so it can't find freedom in a field. It has to be according to its design. So a few years ago, being vulnerable, somebody asked me a couple questions that had to do with authority and vulnerability. And here I see that living with authority and vulnerability allows true flourishing to occur as image bearers. So I was sitting at a table and somebody asked me, what makes you significant? I was like, well, I don't know. What makes you legitimate? And I'm not sure. And ask these questions yourself. What makes you significant right now? What makes you legitimate? What gives you identity right now? See, we live in just a saturated world that just, we're like oversensitized to everything. We go down the road and we see billboards for everything. On our phone, there's just advertisements on TV. There's commercials. Everything in the world says, you need me, you want me, buy me, kiss me, hug me. Like Apple's newest thing with the phone is like, you can now check your, when the iPhone came out, you can now check your mail at home. You can now message all over the world. What they're not saying is, you can never walk away from work, because that's what happens. But we're just like oversaturated with all these things, and when we think about like what makes us significant, right? It can't be material. What makes us legitimate? It can't be like something that's self-seeking or something that I've accomplished. We really have to stay rooted in the identity. Those songs like "No Longer Slaves." That song, when it came out a few years ago, I don't know if there's been a song like that just kind of exploded across the church like "No Longer Slaves." And there was just such a hunger and thirst for the people of God to just know their identity that song came out, and it just spoke to people's heart. And I love that song, but we know when worship is happening, we're singing, I am no longer a slave to fear, I am a child of God. We're looking at ourselves, but ultimately worship takes us to a place where we're not looking at ourselves, but we're looking back on to God, and that's where songs of identity are vital. But it's just a thing that we need to pass through that. Once we establish who we are, we just look back to Jesus and give him praise. So being image bearers is all about identity and walking in authority, and both vulnerability leading to flourishing. So here's a little chart to kind of give us a visual of what this looks like. All right, so we have two axes. On the one, vulnerability. Okay, on the other, we have authority. All right, so authority runs vertical, vulnerability runs horizontal. I always want to say horizontal. Somebody once told me that because they mix it up, vertical and horizontal. So there's 4 quadrants in this chart here. Okay, so you'll see in quadrant 1. Okay, you have full authority and full vulnerability up in quadrant 1. Quadrant 2, you have completely vulnerable with very little, no authority. Quadrant 3, no authority, no vulnerability. And up in quadrant 4, you have all authority but no vulnerability. So remember, authority is the capacity for meaningful action. Being vulnerable is being exposed to meaningful risk. So we're going to start up here in what it means to have complete authority and no vulnerability. It means exploiting. Okay, it's very self-seeking. If you think of a movie that there's the villains or the bad guys, but the real bad guys, the real bad dude is so buried under other bad guys, you really don't know who he is because he's always got somebody kind of working with him down the line. So he has complete authority, but he has got no meaningful risk. Like, he can just rotate through people. You might think of like dictatorship as well, like complete authority, but just no vulnerability. There's no exposure to risk. You're just able to get things done. Okay? And remember, we're going to turn all this around to what it means to be an image bearer. So let's say somebody has no authority, is living in no authority and living with no vulnerability. We have withdrawing. Within all of us being image bearers, we have a desire for a level of authority, and we're created to be vulnerable. One of the things that I experienced here last time, and even tonight, was that there's a level of vulnerability among you guys. Like, there's a level of trust. There's a level of, like, you all kind of hold your heart out there. There's a level of family. There's a level of just true covenant together, that, like, things will come our way, but the blood of Jesus is really what holds us together. And that's part of being vulnerable. With withdrawing, okay, this would be like when we just love to watch video games or to play video games. Within our video games, a lot of times, and not all of you may relate to this, I get that, but within video games, there's always a level of, like, control and authority. I remember in junior high there was a game that was called The Sims, and it was all about, like, on the computer you had your own, like, family, and you had to, like, build your own house and go to work and set up, like, this whole structure. It was a simulated life, but I mean, really, there was no vulnerability or authority in that. It was just a withholding, a withdrawing that I have in those moments. We're getting a little bit closer. When we have no authority and we're completely vulnerable, we just kind of live in a state of suffering. You might think of some people who are homeless, where the system is just can't help them, and they live without authority and are just completely vulnerable and have really no way to get something done, and they're just suffering. As we work around this circle, quadrant 1, this is where we'll find what I think is real flourishing, when we have complete authority and are walking in complete vulnerability. And we can see this in Jesus' life. When we have vulnerability, to wake up some of the emotion, to become more vulnerable in my life. A couple of years ago, my wife and I, we went to just like a counseling thing out of just like health of marriage, just to learn more about yourself. And I was telling this story of what took place when I was in junior high. I had a good friend, one of my neighbors, his brother committed suicide, and I was in junior high, and I remember this moment like it was yesterday, like where it was. My mom got the phone call, and I remember all these things and the pain that I felt. And I'm telling this story, and my wife and the counselor are just crying. They're just expressing all this emotion, and I'm not. And I was looking at them, and I'm like, why are you guys crying? What are you feeling? And at that moment, I realized there was something that was shut off for me, and we all desire to become more like Jesus. And this is the part for me that was just the hardest to show, to awaken emotion, to be vulnerable. And the counselor looked at me and said, Corey, like what you just told us is tragic. Like it is devastating, and you might not realize the effects that it's had to you up to this point. And I was like, well, I want to grow in this. I want to be vulnerable. I want to pursue this. I believe in it. And he goes, you just need to start like sitting in the pain. You need to start searching the depths of your heart. You need to start searching like the darkest corners of your heart, not to seek depression or anything like that, but just to get attached to like the suffering. Like we should feel something for the suffering in the world. Like we should feel something for the homeless. We should feel something for the orphans. We should feel something for the third world countries. Like it shouldn't just take a mission trip or a video on the news or a tragedy to happen that strikes something in our heart. Like that should just be within us constantly. And I've done, like for the past 3 years, been, working on being a little more vulnerable. A few weeks ago, I mean, most of you guys are from Boyertown. We'll just, yeah. Did anyone know Aaron Landis? Or know about? So I have a friend, his name's Caleb, grown up, and he married Erin. They were like youth group sweethearts, lived in Boyertown. And a couple months after they had their second kid, she got diagnosed with a rare type of kidney cancer. And for 2 years, she kind of fought this cancer, and a few weeks ago, lost that battle to cancer. And she was 29, and she had a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, and her husband's 29. And I had a moment in that time to just kind of withdraw from that and say, I don't want to go near that pain. Like I'm 31, my wife's 29, I have a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old, and I didn't want to go near that pain. I didn't want to touch that suffering. I did not want to be vulnerable, but I knew to grow in it. Like I needed to grieve with those who grieve. I needed to mourn with those who mourn. I needed to just be present and not run from the vulnerability and the emotion in that moment. And it was a painful 2 weeks to sit in it, to cry in it, to be driving and just weeping in it. I would have felt much more comfortable just moving on and just avoiding it all. But as you guys know, and I knew the last time I was here, a few people spoke up losses in their life. And I know, thank you for being here today, Marilyn, as well, tonight. They're painful times, but one that if we don't know what it's like to walk through suffering and to be vulnerable, that we'll never fully know what God can, how He can comfort us and how He can come alongside of us. And in those greatest, moments of mourning and despair, you'll find a more fuller picture of Jesus and a more fuller sense of His presence in those moments. Jesus took that road less traveled. You know, the road to glory was one through suffering. When Jesus came, he came to set the captives free. He was with the poor people. He was with the sick. He was with the castaways. He did not live a life of exploiting where he just was authoritative. It's just not God's nature. He's a vulnerable, loving God. He's not a God that just withdraws from you, but he's one that has both vulnerability and authority, and it's a road from suffering into flourishing. And tonight, you know, for the church, I just think it's vital, and I'm not like, this is not to you guys as, I don't think you're being like this way. I think you guys are doing a great job of flourishing in having dinner together, providing meals together, loving on each other, giving Ed a hard time. Just jump on me.
I think that's nice.
Yeah. But you guys, like, you really are for each other. And I am sure so many of you have cried on each other's shoulders and have hugged each other and have loved on each other in times of pain, in times of sorrow. And I just want to say that, like, that is well done. Like, God is so pleased for you in this body to just carry that out and have a safe place and be vulnerable. Continue to grow in being vulnerable. If you're in a relationship, dive into it. Like, believe me, having your heart out there is very, 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 very risky. But true vulnerability is an exposure to meaningful risk, all right? You're not just putting it out for no reason. Like, there is something meaningful to come from it. And continue to pursue it, okay? I want to read this real quick from Matthew chapter 28. This is, Jesus is on the way to get crucified. And there is not a moment in history that's more vulnerable and more authoritative, okay, than when Jesus is on the cross, completely stripped down, beaten, bloody, just his flesh being ripped out, he's being stabbed, he's being suffocated from hanging there, completely vulnerable. But his capacity for the meaningful action, he's in complete authority of that time, and therefore he's flourishing. And we all know, because of the cross, the resurrection, we can have life, we have freedom, we have Jesus in our midst. But look at this moment here. It says, then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole Roman cohort around him. All right, so they took him, they put him down, and then everyone circled around him. And try to enter into, like, let your heart become a little vulnerable in this moment, picturing this moment. So he's down, the Roman cohort around him. They stripped him. They put a scarlet robe on him. They twisted together a crown of thorns. They put it on his head and a reed in his right hand. Then they knelt down before him, mocking him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they spat on him. They took the reed out of his hand and began to beat him on the head. After they had mocked him, they took the scarlet robe off of him and put his own garments back on him and led him away to crucify him. I find it, what words can you have for the King of the world to come and to be just humiliated, to put a staff in his hand, a crown of thorns on his head, even put a robe on him, just mocking him and then spitting on him. Vulnerability can be painful sometimes. But I just want you to know, to be true image bearers, you have to be vulnerable. We have to walk in authority, and it takes great risk. But it really is all about becoming great image bearers of Christ. So tonight, that was what I wanted to share. That's where my mind's been wrapped around these words, vulnerability and authority, and not defined by the world, but how Jesus defines them, and what it truly means to flourish, what it truly means to come to life. And let's just go into a time. I'll go into a time of prayer, and we'll go from there. Jesus, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, there is none like you, Father. To show true love, to come, to be beaten, to be spit upon, to really have your heart just out. Even as we sang, love ran red down the cross. How great of love, Father, that you had for us. And may the devil just not suppress our emotion anymore. May he not be allowed to push back the vulnerability. May he not let us just walk only in authority, Father. But may we pursue relationships. May we pursue true relationships. Being vulnerable, being significant, being legitimate, having an identity, God. May we pursue you. May our relationships truly, truly, truly show who you are, God. That there is only one God. And may our lives truly reflect that, Jesus. May we truly, truly flourish as image bearers the way that you've designed us to, God. We thank you for this moment, this time. We thank you for this day. God, there is not an hour that's going to pass that was like this hour right here, God. And may your name be praised tonight. May it be praised tomorrow. May we wake up feeling renewed and refreshed. May you show us, truly show us what it means to be vulnerable, to walk in authority, and to really flourish in your kingdom. We're asking for your kingdom to come, God. Your will be done on earth as it is. In Jesus' name, amen.